The rancher ordered a bride, but a famous prostitute walked off the wagon. That should have been the end of it. A simple, embarrassing mistake. He'd send her packing, and that would be that. But nothing about the woman in the crimson dress was simple, and Tobias Crow was about to find out that some mistakes don't just change your life. They burn it to the ground. The dust hadn't even settled when he knew. The woman standing in front of his ranch house wasn't the plain, God-fearing widow from Missouri he'd been writing to for 3 months. No, this woman was a fire. Her dress clung to her like a second skin. Her lips were painted a sinful red, and she carried herself with a confidence that could stare down a wolf. Tobias stood frozen on his porch, his hat clutched in his hands. He watched her scan his property, not like a guest, but like a queen surveying her new kingdom. Her raven black hair was pinned up in a way that belonged in a fancy city saloon, not the grit and dust of the frontier. When her green eyes, sharp as broken glass, finally landed on him, something twisted in his gut. It wasn't disappointment. It was pure, primal danger. The wagon driver, a jumpy fellow with worn-out eyes, scrambled down from his seat. He scurried over to Tobias, practically wringing his hands. "Mr. Crow," he stammered, like he was delivering a death notice. "Got your, package." Package? He called this vision in red a package, as if she were a sack of flour or a new plow blade. Tobias stepped off the porch, his boots thudding on the dry earth. He was trying to make sense of it all. His letters had been with a woman named Sarah Beth Collins, a practical woman, modest, looking for an honest life. This woman looked like she hadn't seen an honest day in her entire life. "There's been a mistake," Tobias said, his voice coming out like gravel. "I ordered a wife, not a—" He trailed off, gesturing helplessly at the woman who was now leaning against his fence post, looking entirely too comfortable. She laughed. The sound was like whiskey and smoke, a melody played in a back alley gambling den. "No mistake, darling," she purred, her southern accent making his name sound like a secret. "Though I suppose the situation is a little more complicated than you were led to believe." Her name was Violet McCall, and she held all the cards. She reached into a small beaded purse and pulled out a letter. The paper was yellowed, creased from being opened and closed 100 times. "Sarah Beth Collins sent me in her place," she said, her smile turning sharp as a knife's edge. "Said she found religion and couldn't possibly leave her missionary work." Then the first twist. "She also said," Violet continued, her eyes glinting, "that what a man like you really needs isn't a wife. It's someone who understands the world for what it really is." Tobias took the letter. His hands weren't steady. It was Sarah Beth's handwriting, no doubt about it. But the words were insane. She wrote about Violet as if she were a gift, a woman who had lived enough to appreciate what he was offering, a woman who would serve him better than any simple wife ever could. But then he saw the other words, the ones hidden between the lines. Sarah Beth wrote about men looking for Violet, dangerous men, men who wouldn't stop. She wrote about debts that had nothing to do with money and sins that chased you across the entire country. "What kind of trouble are you in?" Tobias asked, his eyes locked on hers. For a split second, the mask dropped. He saw something raw in her eyes, something desperate and hunted. "The kind that gets people killed," she whispered. "But don't you worry, Cowboy. I don't plan on staying long enough for it to find me." And that's when he noticed it. The wagon driver was already back on his seat, whip in hand, ready to bolt. He wasn't even unloading her trunk. He was leaving her there. This wasn't a mistake. It was a setup. Someone had sent this woman to him, knowing exactly who she was, knowing exactly what kind of hell was riding on her heels. The wagon vanished in a plume of dust, leaving Tobias alone with an orchid in a cattle pen. Violet just stood there, watching him with those all-knowing eyes, waiting to see what he would do. "You can't stay here," he said, but the words felt like dust in his mouth. The nearest town was a 2-day ride. The sun was bleeding all over the horizon. "This is a respectable place. I have a reputation." "Respectable?" She said the word like it tasted rotten. That's a word for people who've never had to choose between their reputation and their life. She started walking toward him, each step deliberate, closing the distance between them. "I understand, Mr. Crow. A woman like me, I could ruin a man like you just by breathing the same air." The way she said his name made his throat tighten. It had been 3 years. 3 years since his wife, Martha, died bringing their son into the world, taking the baby with her. 3 years of silence, of talking to horses just to hear a voice. Now this beautiful, dangerous woman was looking at him like she could see every crack in his soul. It's not just my reputation, he managed, trying to sound firm. You said it yourself. Men are looking for you. Dangerous men. I won't have that trouble on my land. Violet tilted her head, a flicker of genuine curiosity in her eyes. Are you afraid of a little danger, Cowboy? Or are you afraid of me? Before he could think of an answer, she was right there. So close he could smell her perfume, something rich and foreign that smelled like trouble and promises. She reached out, her fingers brushing his as she touched the letter in his hand. Sarah Beth wrote more than what you read aloud, she said, her voice dropping to a murmur. She told me about your wife, about the baby, about how you've been sitting in this empty house dying a little more each day. Her voice was suddenly gentle, and it threw him completely off balance. She thought, maybe someone who understands loss is exactly what you needed. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Sarah Beth couldn't have known that. He'd never written about Martha, never told a soul about the ache that lived in his ribs. How did she know about my wife? He whispered. Violet's smile was sad now. The sharp edges were gone. Sarah Beth Collins and I, we have more history than you know. We both learned what happens to women who trust the wrong kind of men. That's when he saw it, a tiny silver scar along her jawline, almost invisible. He saw the way she held herself, poised to either fight or flee at a moment's notice. The trouble she was running from had already left its mark. The men after me, she continued, her voice barely there, they're not just thugs. They're connected. They have long arms and longer memories. They don't forgive, and they never, ever forget. A chill that had nothing to do with the evening air crawled up his spine. What kind of people? She looked out at the horizon, where the sky was now the color of a fresh wound. The kind who own judges, the kind who own sheriffs, the kind of people who make other people disappear. She turned back, and for the first time he saw raw, undiluted fear in her eyes. But they don't know about this place. Not yet. Yet, that one word hung between them, a promise and a threat. The first stars began to prick the deep purple sky. Tobias finally made a choice. He knew it was the wrong one, but it was the only one he could make. One night, he said, the words feeling heavy as stone. You can have the guest room for tonight, but in the morning, you're gone. Violet's smile was different this time. It was soft, almost grateful. One night it is, she said, moving toward the trunk the driver had dumped in the dirt. Though I should warn you, Mr. Crow, I'm not the kind of house guest you're used to. He watched her struggle with the heavy trunk, and before he could stop himself, he was moving to help. His hands covered hers on the cold brass handle. She looked up, startled. I may not approve of your profession, he said quietly, but my mother raised me to treat a lady with respect. She let out a short, breathy laugh, with no bitterness in it this time. Lady, it's been a long while since anyone called me that. He lifted the trunk. It was surprisingly light. Most of my things got left behind, she explained. It's easier to disappear when you travel light. Inside the house, he lit the lamps. The flickering light cast long shadows on the walls of the home he'd built with Martha. He led her to the spare room, the room they'd always hoped would be a nursery. The irony was a bitter pill. Bringing this woman, a living, breathing scandal, into the room meant for his child. It's not much, he said, setting the trunk down, but it's clean. Violet ran her hand over the patchwork quilt on the bed, her touch so gentle it was like she was afraid it would turn to dust. It's perfect, she whispered, and he heard a sound in her voice he never expected. Gratitude, real, unvarnished gratitude. There's water in the basin. I'll have coffee ready at dawn. He turned to leave, to put a closed door between them, but he stopped. Violet? Those men. How long do we have before they figure out where you are? She was silent for so long, he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, Her voice was a ghost. They had someone watching Sarah Beth, someone tracking her letters, every single one. She looked at him, and her eyes were filled with a terrible knowledge. They know about this place, Tobias. They've always known. The blood in his veins turned to ice. What are you saying? I'm saying, she said, her hands now shaking, the confident mask gone completely. Sarah Beth didn't send me here to save me. She sent me here to save you. The room felt like it was shrinking. The lamplight flickered, making the shadows dance like devils. The men looking for me, Violet said, her voice cracking. They don't just want me back. They want to make an example out of anyone who helps me. Anyone who shows me a single shred of kindness. How long? His voice was flat, deadly. They were 3 days behind me when I left Kansas City. Maybe less now. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold herself together. I thought I could just stay one night, get some rest and be gone before you even woke up. But I was a fool. If they were tracking Sarah Beth's mail, they already know all about you. Her voice broke. They know your name. They know about this ranch. They probably know what you had for breakfast 3 weeks ago. These aren't just outlaws, Tobias. They're a machine. They're connected to politicians, federal marshals, men with power you can't even imagine. Suddenly, a sound from outside. A twig snapping. It could have been a coyote. It could have been the wind. But Tobias had spent 3 long years alone on this land. He knew its sounds, and that wasn't one of them. They're already here, aren't they? He whispered. He moved to the window, peering through a crack in the curtains. The moon bathed his land in silver and black. Empty pasture. The dark shape of his barn. Nothing. But the feeling was all wrong. The air itself felt tight, like it was holding its breath. False alarm, he said, but his hand was already on the rifle he kept propped by the door. Just my imagination. Violet came to stand beside him, so close he could feel the heat coming off her skin. Your imagination didn't keep you alive out here for 3 years by being careless, she said softly. If you feel something's wrong, it is. She was right. The silence outside was too deep, too perfect. Even the horses in the barn were quiet, and his horses were better than any damn watchdog. Tell me about Sarah Beth, he said, his back still to her, his eyes still scanning the darkness. How did she know about Martha? I never wrote about her. Violet leaned her head against the window frame. Her reflection was a pale ghost in the glass. Sarah Beth Collins isn't her real name, she said after a long moment. Her real name is Sarah Beth Morrison, and she was married to a territorial judge in Missouri, a very powerful, very dangerous man. Morrison. The name hit Tobias like a stray bullet. Judge Morrison. He'd seen the name in the papers. A man tied to land grabs, railroad disputes, and rumors of corruption that were always silenced before they could take root. She was his wife, Violet continued, her voice flat, until she found out what he was really into. Human trafficking, land fraud, blackmail that went all the way to Washington. When she tried to leave him, he had her declared insane, locked her away in a private asylum. How did she get out? Tobias asked, turning from the window. She didn't escape, Violet said, and there was a flicker of pride in her haunted eyes. I broke her out. The pieces started to slam into place, forming a picture that was darker and uglier than he could have imagined. So Morrison owns the brothel where you worked. He used it, she corrected. He used the girls to compromise powerful men. He collected their secrets like butterflies in a jar. Sarah Beth and we became friends. When I found out what he'd done to her, I couldn't just let her rot in there. So the men hunting you, they work for Judge Morrison. And now they're hunting Sarah Beth too, she finished, and anyone who ever helped us. She looked at him, her face a mask of regret. I didn't know she was writing to you, Tobias. I swear. I didn't know she was sending me to an innocent man. But you came anyway. I was desperate, she whispered. When you're drowning, you don't ask questions about the hand that pulls you out of the water. She reached out, her fingers warm on his arm. But I've dragged you into my grave, and I won't be able to live with that. Just then, one of the horses in the barn let out a low, nervous whinny. It was a sound of pure anxiety, not the sound of a horse spooked by a predator. It was the sound a horse makes when it smells a stranger, a human stranger. How many? Tobias asked, already moving toward his gun cabinet. Morrison's private army is at least 6 men, she said, her voice shaking but steady. Ex-soldiers, ex-lawmen, the kind of men who shoot first and never ask questions at all. They're professionals, Tobias. This isn't a fair fight. He pulled out his shotgun, his hands moving with practiced speed, loading the shells. Maybe not, but this is my land, and they don't know it like I do. You don't understand, she said, grabbing his arm. They don't just kill you, they erase you, your reputation, your home, everyone you've ever known. Morrison has judges in his pocket across 5 territories. He'll make it look like you were the criminal. And then they heard it, the sound that confirmed everything, the soft, deliberate crunch of a boot on the gravel path just outside the front door. Someone trying very, very hard not to be heard. Tobias motioned for her to get down, his heart pounding against his ribs. He crept toward the door. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was 100 times worse. 3 years ago, Violet whispered from the floor, her voice so quiet he could barely hear it. You filed a land claim against the Territorial Railroad Commission. Do you remember? He froze, his hand inches from the doorknob. Of course he remembered. The railroad tried to steamroll him, to run their tracks right through his best grazing pasture. He fought them in court, and he won. It cost him nearly everything he had, but he won. Judge Morrison, she whispered, was the judge who ruled against you in the first trial, before you won on appeal. Your case cost him a very, very big bribe from the railroad. It all crashed down on him, a sickening, horrifying clarity. This wasn't about Violet, not really. She was just the excuse. This was about him. This was revenge. Sarah Beth sent you here because she knew, he said, the words tasting like ash. She knew they were coming for me anyway. She was trying to warn you, Violet cried softly, to give you a fighting chance. Crash! A window in the back of the house shattered. The heavy thud of boots hit his kitchen floor. They were inside. Tobias grabbed Violet's hand, pulling her toward the back of the house, but the sound of more breaking glass told them that way was cut off. They were surrounded, trapped in the home he'd built for a life that had been stolen from him. The root cellar, he hissed, pulling her toward a trap door hidden under a rug by the fireplace. There's a tunnel. It connects to the barn. A calm professional voice called out from the darkness outside. Tobias Crow, this is Deputy Marshal Crawford. We have a federal warrant for the arrest of one Violet McCall and for any person found harboring her. A federal warrant. Morrison's reach was even longer than she'd thought. We know you're in there, the voice called again. Come out now and no one gets hurt. Violet squeezed his hand, her whole body trembling. They're not here to arrest anyone, she whispered. Crawford is Morrison's right-hand man. I've seen him. He's a butcher. Heavy, methodical footsteps were moving through the house now, room by room. They were being hunted. Tobias wrenched the trapdoor open, revealing a dark, narrow hole and a rickety ladder. Go, he urged her, but she shook her head, her green eyes blazing in the lamplight. You go first. If they get you, I'm dead anyway. Besides, Cowboy, I've been running from men like this a lot longer than you have. Before he could argue, she leaned in and kissed him. It was fast and desperate, a collision of fear and something else he couldn't name. Her lips tasted of courage. For luck, she whispered against his mouth. Then the front door splintered, exploding inward off its hinges. Their time had just run out. Tobias didn't hesitate. He dropped through the opening, landing hard on the packed dirt of the root cellar below. The air was cool and smelled of earth and old memories. Above him, Violet scrambled down, pulling the heavy trapdoor shut just as the thunder of heavy boots stormed into the living room. In the pitch blackness, he grabbed her hand. This way, he whispered, leading her toward the back wall where the tunnel began. The tunnel was tight, claustrophobic. They had to move single file, his hand on the rough-hewn wall, hers clutching his shirt. Muffled voices echoed from the house above. Check every room. He wants them alive. Alive. The word sent a new jolt of fear through him. Violet stumbled behind him. Why alive? She breathed. Morrison never leaves witnesses. Men like Morrison didn't keep people alive for their health. They kept them alive because they wanted something. And whatever it was probably worse than dying. The tunnel began to slope up. He could smell hay and horses. They were close. But that brought a new problem. If Crawford's men were as good as she said, they'd have someone watching the barn. It was the only other way out. There's something else, Violet said from the darkness behind him. Something I didn't tell you about Sarah Beth's letter. Even now, with killers just feet away, she was holding back. What? He demanded. She wrote about a safe. An old iron safe you inherited from your wife's family. She said it might contain documents. Documents that could be very dangerous in the wrong hands. Tobias stopped dead, so suddenly she bumped right into him. Martha's family safe. He'd completely forgotten. It was a heavy, ugly thing he'd hauled up to the barn loft and buried under old blankets years ago. Martha's father. He'd been a surveyor for the territorial government, a man who mapped land for the railroads, for mining companies. Survey maps, he breathed into the darkness. It all became terrifyingly clear. Her father. He documented everything. Ore deposits, water rights, things the government never officially recorded. Things that could be worth millions. Or, Violet's voice came, full of dawning horror, things that could prove existing railroad contracts were based on lies, on falsified geography. This isn't about the old lawsuit, Tobias realized, his blood running cold. This is about me inheriting the one thing that can destroy Morrison's entire empire. Just then, a floorboard creaked above their heads. The barn door groaned open. Footsteps, slow, careful footsteps moved across the wooden floor. Someone was in the barn. Searching. They were trapped. Killers in the house behind them, and another one waiting at their only exit. We need those maps, Violet whispered, her voice urgent. As long as we have them, Morrison can't afford to kill us. They're our only card to play. The loft, Tobias whispered back. The safe is in the loft, 20 feet directly above whoever is in my barn right now. Through the cracks in the floorboards above, they could see the silhouette of a man. He moved with the quiet confidence of a predator, his rifle held at the ready. He was getting closer to the hidden exit of their tunnel. And then Tobias realized the fatal flaw in his own plan. The tunnel exit wasn't just near the loft, it was directly beneath it. To get to their only piece of leverage, they would have to expose themselves in the exact spot the killer was searching. The boots stopped, directly above them. They were out of time. Violet pressed something small, cold and metallic into his palm. A derringer, a lady's gun. 2 shots. You're not asking me to do this, she whispered in his ear, her breath warm against his skin. I've got more experience with desperate men than you do, Cowboy. Make them count. The man above moved toward the ladder to the loft, to the safe. If he got up there, it was over. He'd have the high ground. Tobias made his choice. He shoved the tunnel door open and rolled out into the hay, the tiny pistol gripped tight in his hand. The man was 20 feet away, his back to them, just reaching for the ladder. Drop it, Tobias said, his voice low and steady. The man spun, impossibly fast. But Violet was faster. She was already out of the tunnel, a shadow moving with deadly grace. She snatched a pitchfork from the wall, and in one fluid motion, jammed the sharp tines against the back of the man's neck. Deputy Marshal Crawford, I presume, she said, her voice dripping with sweet poison. Though we both know that badge is about as real as your concern for the law. Crawford didn't flinch. He was a tall man, scarred and hard. Miss McCall, he said calmly, the judge will be so pleased to have you back. I'm sure he will, Violet shot back, right up until the moment those survey maps get delivered to the real federal marshals, the ones he hasn't bought yet. It was a bluff, a beautiful, desperate bluff. Tell me, Crawford, she purred, does Morrison know that Tobias here finally figured out what his father-in-law was really mapping? Something flickered in Crawford's eyes, a tiny crack in the professional mask. What maps? The question came too fast, too genuine. He didn't know. Morrison had sent his dogs to kill and capture, but he hadn't told them what they were really after. He didn't trust his own men. The maps, Tobias said, jumping on the opening Violet had created, that proved Judge Morrison has been faking geological reports for the railroads for 5 years. The ones that show he's been selling off federal mineral rights that don't belong to him. The color drained from Crawford's face. A crime like that, it wouldn't just take down the judge. It would take down everyone. Every corrupt official, every hired gun like Crawford who was on his payroll. Those maps don't exist, Crawford snarled, but there was no conviction in his voice. Then why are you here? Violet pressed the pitchfork harder. Why send 6 men to kill one rancher and grab one woman? What's so damn valuable about this patch of dirt that it's worth all this blood? And that's when they heard it. The thunder of hooves. Multiple riders coming in hard and fast. Through the open barn door, Tobias could see the bobbing orange glow of torches. At least 4 more men, riding straight for them. Your backup? Tobias asked Crawford. A slow, cruel smile spread across Crawford's face. Insurance, he said. The judge doesn't like loose ends. Especially loose ends who might start blabbing about non-existent maps. Violet's eyes met his across the barn. The same terrible realization dawned on both of them. Those riders weren't backup. They were the cleanup crew. Morrison wasn't just sending men to kill them. He was sending men to kill everyone, including his own hired killers. They're not here for us, Tobias told Crawford, his voice grim. They're here for you, too. They're here to burn it all down and bury the ashes. For the first time since he walked into that barn, Crawford looked afraid. Pure animal fear. And that fear was their only hope. Crawford broke. Faced with a choice between certain death from his boss or a slim chance with his captives, he chose the devil he knew. There's a trail, he said, the words tumbling out of him. A back way through the canyon. My horse is tied out back. We can be gone before they even get here. Not without the maps, Violet said, not moving the pitchfork an inch. While she kept Crawford covered, Tobias scrambled up the ladder to the loft. The safe was there, under a dusty horse blanket. His hands trembled as he worked the combination Martha had taught him, praying the numbers still worked. The lock clicked open. Inside, rolled into tight scrolls, was the truth. Page after page of his father-in-law's meticulous handwriting, detailing a web of corruption so vast it was staggering. This was it, the evidence that could bring it all crashing down. He stuffed the maps inside his shirt. The sound of the horses was deafening now. They were in the yard. Move! Violet yelled. The 3 of them, rancher, prostitute, and killer, ran for Crawford's horse. It was a strong beast, built for endurance. Crawford swung into the saddle, then pulled Violet up behind him. Tobias untied his own horse from the corral, swinging up onto its bare back. They rode like the devil himself was chasing them, which he probably was. Behind them, the night sky erupted in orange. The torches had found the dry wood of his barn, his house. They were burning everything. Burning the house where Martha had died. Burning the life he had tried to build. Burning the past to a cinder. The canyon trail was a treacherous black ribbon cut into the rock. Without Crawford's knowledge of every twist and turn, they would have plunged to their deaths a dozen times. They rode through the night, the fire at their backs a fading, angry star. By dawn, they were miles away, tired and filthy, but alive. 3 days later, they were sitting in the office of a man named William Hayes, a real federal marshal, a man whose name was whispered in the territories as one of the few lawmen Judge Morrison couldn't buy. Hayes spread the maps across his desk. As he read, his face went from curiosity to shock to pure, cold fury. Judge Morrison, Hayes said, his voice like chipping stone, will face federal charges for conspiracy, fraud, and murder for hire. Your testimony, he said, looking at Crawford, combined with these documents, we're going to bury him. Crawford, who'd been granted full immunity for his cooperation, just nodded grimly. His network, it goes all the way to the top. This will gut the territorial government. Tobias wasn't listening. He was watching Violet. She was standing by the window, looking down at the bustling city below. For the first time since she'd stepped off that wagon, she looked still. The hunted look was gone from her eyes. When they were alone standing on the steps of the federal building, he asked her, "What happens now?" She turned to him. The woman in the crimson dress was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had walked through fire and hadn't flinched. and in her green eyes he saw something he never thought he'd see. Peace. "Now," she said, "I testify. I make sure Morrison and his entire rotten network can never hurt anyone ever again." She took a step closer. She smelled of cheap boarding house soap, not expensive perfume. It was the best thing he'd ever smelled. "And then, if you'll have me, I was thinking I'd like to help you rebuild that ranch." "I don't have a ranch," he said quietly. "They burned it." "You have the land," she said, and a small, genuine smile touched her lips. "The government is going to compensate you for everything. And besides," and she added, her eyes twinkling, "I have some money saved up, enough for lumber and some cattle." 6 months later, Tobias Crow stood on the porch of his new house. It was smaller than the old one, but it was stronger. He watched his wife Violet tending the small garden she'd planted. She'd traded her silk dresses for denim, and her painted lips for the natural color that came from working under the sun. She hadn't just helped him rebuild his home. She'd helped him rebuild his life. The lonely, broken man who ordered a bride in a desperate attempt to feel something again was gone. In his place stood a man who knew that sometimes the best things in life come from the biggest mistakes. Judge Morrison died in a federal prison a year later. The official story was a shiv in the yard, but everyone knew his own network had finally cut its last loose end. Crawford, true to his word, disappeared, starting a new life out west. And the maps, the documents that almost got them killed, they became the basis for new laws that protected honest settlers from men like Morrison forever. Sometimes in the quiet of the evening, Tobias would see Violet reading the newspaper, a fierce look of satisfaction on her face. But mostly she looked forward, planning, dreaming, talking about the children they would raise in this house, on this land, a future built from ashes. The rancher had ordered a wife. What he got was a warrior. What he got was the love of his life. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Your support means the world to us.